Hey y'all, welcome as we continue through the book of 1 Samuel together. And today brings us to chapter 27 in the book of 1 Samuel. The Lord wants a close and personal relationship with us, and he wants to guide us with his very presence, the way that a parent guides a child. He wants us to know his voice, and he wants us to know and experience his presence, and he wants us to follow his lead and trust him in every step. He wants us to be able to discern his smiles or frowns and know which way he wants us to go as a result. In this chapter, David is struggling within his heart, much like we all do at times. He is struggling to stand firm in his faith before the Lord and trust him with every single outcome and in every single step. To be fair, a madman was literally out on the hunt trying to murder him, but he still is wavering in his faith, and we're about to see that, and it shows the humanity of David. We'll go ahead and start in verse 1. But David kept thinking to himself, "Someday Saul is going to get me. The best thing I can do is escape the Philistines. Then Saul will stop hunting for me in Israelite territory, and I will finally be safe." So David took his 600 men and went over and joined Achish, son of Maach, the king of Gath. David and his men and their families settled there with Achish at Gath. David brought his 2 wives along with him, Aniahem from Jezreel and Abigail, Nabal's widow, from Carmel. So David has been a fugitive on the run from Saul for about 7 years by now, and he decides to flee to Gath, the home of Goliath and enemy territory. David had every single reason in the world to stay in the land and continue to trust the Lord in his sovereignty, trust him for protection and provision. He was the anointed king. The Lord had already anointed him as the next king of Israel, and he knew that eventually the Lord would give him the throne. Abigail assured him of this, and even Saul himself admitted that David would ultimately triumph. Living a life of wilderness exile with his life daily in the balance was starting to weigh on him, rightfully so. He also had 2 wives and 600 men to look out for. In roughly 3 years, David's exile would come to an end, and he would be ruling the people of Judah in Hebron, but he had no way of knowing that just yet. It takes faith and patience to receive what the Lord has promised, and the Lord wants us to trust him in the wait. And David is wavering. He is wavering in both of these essential areas at the moment, even though the Lord had already anointed him as the next king. I can't speak for anyone else, but I know I have been there, and I can relate to this. I have done this and experienced this several times and in several instances in life. Just like he does for us, the Lord was using the difficulties that David was facing to make him the man of God that God created him to be. The Lord was preparing David for the calling that he planned for his life from the very beginning. However, in this very moment in season, David decided to go his own way and try to solve his own problems. I have been there. It is always the wisest move to take our hands off and let the Lord do his work. Let the Lord lead. We have to be so careful not to yield to difficult circumstances around us. When we start to look at the Lord through our circumstances, instead of looking at our circumstances through the Lord's view, through the Lord's eye, we will lose faith, and we will lose patience, and we will lose courage, and the enemy will gain ground that does not belong to him. We need to stay laser focused on Jesus every moment of every day. Stay laser focused on his mission and his plans for our lives. The Lord created us for just a time as this, and his plans for our lives are good. We can trust him. He didn't create us to simply hang out for a season of time on this earth. He created us for his glory, for his purpose, for his mission, and yes, for our good and the good of those around us as well. And we'll go ahead and continue in verse 4. Word soon reached Saul that David had fled to Gath, so he stopped hunting for him. One day David said to Achish, If it is all right with you, I would rather live in one of the country towns instead of here in the royal city. So Achish gave him the town of Ziklag, which belongs to the kings of Judah to this day, and they lived there among the Philistines for a year and 4 months. So David asked for a city of his own. He had fled to enemy land, thinking that Saul would not chase him there, and he was right. Saul backed off. The last time that David actually was in the city of Gath, he pretended that he was crazy, and they had sent him away. This time, David was openly welcomed. An enemy of Saul would have been warmly welcomed by Gath. Achish could make use of David's tactical skills and the battle-honed skills of David's courageous men as well. David, however, did not want to stay in the royal city of Gath with all of his men. He clearly planned to settle here for a good season because he requested his own city. He requested a place of their own to reside in one of the country towns. David was a very diplomatic man, and he was very diplomatic in the way he phrased his request to the king Achish. He humbled himself before the king, and David's services were readily available to him. Achish quickly accepted the proposal and gave David Ziklag, which was a town of about 25 miles southwest of Gath on the border of Simeon, but it was under Philistine control. Since Achish gave the town to David, it belonged to the kings of Judah ever after. There could not have been a better base of operation for David and his men at this time, and they made very good use of it, as we'll see when we continue in verse 8. David and his men spent their time raiding the Geshurites, the Girzites, and the Amalekites, people who had lived near shore toward the land of Egypt since ancient times. David did not leave one person alive in the villages he attacked. He took the sheep, goats, cattle, donkeys, camels, and clothing before returning home to see King Achish. "Where did you make your raid today?" Achish would ask. And David would reply, "Against the south of Judah, the Jerahmeelites and the Kenites. No one was left alive to come to Gath and tell where he had really been." This happened again and again while he was living among the Philistines. Achish believed David and thought to himself, "By now the people of Israel must hate him bitterly. Now he will have to stay here and serve me forever." You kind of want to add a ha 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 at the end of that because it just kind of fits right there. While living in enemy territory for a year and 4 months, David followed a pattern of attacking people in villages who were against the Israelites and friendly with the Philistines. There were no witnesses, so David continued this pattern. David may no longer be residing in Israel, but Israel clearly still resides in David. He would tell the king that he was attacking the allies of Judah, but it was not true. Rather than raiding and attacking the allies of Judah, he was actually raiding and attacking the allies of Achish, the enemies of Israel. David was essentially secretly following the orders in Deuteronomy chapter 20, verses 16 through 18, and cleaning up the land that Joshua and his successors failed to conquer when they entered the promised land. At the same time, he was eliminating any survivors who would take word to Achish in Gath that David was living a lie. David would bring back the spoils and the gifts, and Achish gladly accepted the spoils, and he believed David. Well, Achish believed the people of Israel were growing in hatred against David, ensuring David would stay with him forever. Ha ha ha! Word was actually getting back to Judah that David was successfully taking out their enemies. This all ultimately increased his popularity with the leaders of Israel, which we will see eventually. We see the humanity of David in this chapter. We are human. We do not get everything right all the time. And I am confident we all have this similar chapter written in our stories. I know that I do. Faith is living without scheming, and David is in a season of living by scheming rather than living by faith in the Lord God Almighty. We don't have to force things or try to do them our own way or run in fear. We literally need to stop and stand still and wait on the Lord. Take your hands off. It literally says that in the Psalms. And let the Lord work. Let him rule. Let him reign. Let him lead. Let him guide. Trust that you are safely tucked in his treasure your pocket, and he will carry you through. We can choose to trust God and stand firm in faith in and through anything and everything that may come. We can trust his will. We can trust his goodness. We can trust his love and faithfulness. David should have known that God's plans for his life were faithful and true, and that he could trust him through everything and for every outcome. The same holds true for us today. The Lord God Almighty has been in every one of our tomorrows, and there is no one better to trust than our Almighty Father. He has us. He wants good for us. He will hold us through, and he will lead us to his victory if we trust him and let him lead. There are seasons that may appear shaky or uncertain or frankly quite upside down and backwards, and it's in those seasons especially that we need to cling tighter. We need to hold firmer. We need to grip fiercer to our loving Father and do not let go. He will not fail. He never has, and he never will. He loves us beyond comprehension, and he is doing a work within us and for his glory and his testimony through our lives. We just have to trust him. Faithfully trust him. Stand firm. Do not waver, not even for a second. Worship him. Praise his name. Stand still and take your hands off. Trust him for the lead and guidance that he will bring if we're willing to listen and surrender. Read his word and pray and follow him in every step and worship him in every single exhale. Thanks, y'all. I hope you're having a glorious day in the Lord.